The school year is back in full swing, and Janae, that can only mean one thing.
College football is back, baby, which means our Red Zone to End Zone team will continue to work hard to provide you the latest college football news and updates throughout the season. Thank you for joining us. I'm Janae Muchmore.
And I'm Brandon Williams. We are geared up for another exciting season, but before we start talking about the team talent, I think Janae has some predictions.
Don't get too excited. One of the things I love about college football is how unpredictable it is. And let me just start by saying week one will be one to remember. You have Alabama and FSU squaring off in Atlanta in what many believe could be the prelude to this year's championship.
A popular opinion is these two teams will see each other in a championship game, but I won't say these are the two teams that I have going to a championship game. I need at least 6 weeks to say who will go.
I won't comment on the championship just yet, but here's an interesting stat for you. Brandon, do you know who holds the longest opening game win streak?
The Florida Gators.
The Florida Gators. And they are playing the Michigan Wolverines in Texas, who destroyed them during the 2016 Citrus Bowl by 41-7. They just might put an end to that streak, but I do like how Mac is starting to step things up a bit as a season opener.
Well, I think the more important question is, do you know what colors you'll be wearing at the end of the season when you lose our College Pick'em Challenge?
Orange and blue, because I'm not going to lose.
I think you mean garnet and gold.
The season hasn't even started, and the trash talking has already begun. Brandon is referring to an annual bet we make, and you can be a part of it too. Just sign up for our ESPN College Pick'em Challenge.
You can download the ESPN Fantasy app and register for Red Zone and End Zone group within the College Pick'em Challenge. Every week you'll be assigned to pick the winner of 10 games they provide. You get a point for every correct answer, and if you are the victor at the end of the season, we will give you $30 cash.
As for Brandon, whoever loses will be forced to go out into the Plaza of the Americas sporting some hideous Seminole attire, where the loser will be harassed by fellow students. But if you need some help making those picks, we've got you covered with our weekly college football previews every Friday evening. But for now, we're about to give you a preview of the top 20 going into the 2017 season.
And here's a quick piece of advice. Steer clear of Janae's picks.
The Big Ten Conference has received national recognition since the AP poll was released earlier this week.
They dominated the top 10 with 3 teams represented, and Michigan just missed the boat, coming in at number 11. Before 2013, the Big Ten really struggled to keep up with the remaining power conferences, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
It all started shortly after Urban Meyer was hired by Ohio State. He got things rolling for the Buckeyes, and the rest of the conference followed suit by hiring new coaches like Jim Harbaugh, Paul Chryst, and Mike Riley.
Last season, they had 5 teams in the top 25 at the end of the season. And although Urban Meyer got a nice championship ring in 2014, he is already ready for another one. They start their season ranked number 2, but would they end up in number 1?
Well, if there is one thing to know about Meyer, it is that he has turned Ohio State into a regular title contender, only losing 6 games since he started 6 seasons ago. They'll be looking for some revenge after their embarrassing 31-0 loss to Clemson in the national semifinal last year.
Returning 15 starters, 8 on offense and 7 on defense, the Buckeyes won't miss a beat.
That includes the return of veteran quarterback J.T. Barrett, who is on pace to become the all-time leading passer for the Buckeyes.
Barrett is very talented and opens the field by his ability to run. I would like to say that he is not the only rushing threat for the Buckeyes, though, as they have an explosive sophomore, Mike Weber, who leads the Buckeyes last year with almost 1,100 yards rushing.
Well, with the new offensive coordinator Kevin Wilson coming from a head coaching position at Indiana, the tempo of the Ohio State offense is about to change. Ohio State offense runs a rushing offense, but Wilson is most notably known for the 2008 Oklahoma offense, and because of that, Ohio's passing game will open up significantly.
Well, the defense won't be a pushover last year. They only returned 3 starters and somehow only allowed 15.5 points per game. This year they returned 7, and who knows what they're capable of. They are rearing and ready to go, as every year for the last 4 they have continued to decrease the number of yards allowed per game.
However, they have a rather difficult schedule that consists of 3 of the top 15 teams. They will face off with Penn State and Oklahoma at home, and then travel to play Michigan on the road.
These will be tough tests for the Buckeyes, but they are the overwhelming favorites to win the Big Ten and appear once again in the playoffs.
Penn State is coming off a rather surprising season after posting an 11-3 record, an improvement from the 7-6 record they had in 2015.
They ended the season last year in disappointment, getting the shorter end of a stick in a great game, though James Franklin has them on the right track to compete in football's premier stage.
They have a rather simple schedule, but what could really trip them up is a 2-week stretch that consists of playing Michigan at home, followed by an away game against Ohio State.
They grew throughout last season, and luckily for them, that growth will come into play as they return 9 starters on offense, who averages 38 points per game.
That's a huge improvement in Penn State's offensive history. The last time they averaged that much was in 2005 under Michael Robinson as quarterback.
They return Heisman candidate Travis McSorley, who threw for 29 touchdowns and can run when needed, but not very far. McSorley has a year under his belt now, which makes him a more dangerous target.
Why would you need to run with him when you have Saquon Barkley, who ran for almost 1,500 yards last season? He is a monster, averaging 5.5 yards per carry, which opens up the field for passing routes.
With the rushing threat, it forces opponents to stay honest and not sell out to the pass. This becomes a problem when Penn State returns 9 of their top 10 wide receivers from last season. The only loss they had, was the leading receiver, Chris Godwin.
And their offensive line is not a pushover as they combine for over 87 starts and will effectively allow the offense to run its plays with limited disruptions.
Defensively, the Lions returned 6 starters and could have trouble as they allowed 25 points per game last season.
But their defensive line is coming back with more experience than ever, returning over 8 of their top 11 linemen who are sure to keep the rush alive.
Their linebacker core, however, lost a key component in Brandon Bell, who is the second leading tackler on the team, though the key for this team is to stay healthy after a unit had tragically encountered an injury bug last season.
The biggest concern, however, falls on the secondary. They had an unfortunate event when John Reed went down after tearing his ACL in the spring. This leaves a rather inexperienced group in the back after the departure of their starting safety, who was a third leading tackler in the Big Ten. So the secondary relies on nothing but newbies who could have benefited from a little more practice.
Well, I see them getting into the New Year's Six Bowl, but that is the highest I see them going. In order to get more, they are going to have to pull off a huge upset in the horseshoe against Ohio State.
I see them falling short in that game, which will put them in second in the Big Ten East.
Now to the Big Ten West. The Wisconsin Badgers received a 9th overall rank and are looking to improve upon an 11-3 record last season.
Well, they certainly don't have to look too hard. They made out pretty well after playing 5 teams ranked in the top 10 last year, but as of now, the only ranked team on their schedule is Michigan.
And with the struggles Michigan is facing this year, it shouldn't be too hard to beat them.
That's not until week 11, though, so anything could happen. Either way, it's a really weak schedule when you hold it side by side to last year's. I mean, look at the daunting 3-week stretch they had that consisted of Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State. And now all you've got is Michigan?
As long as they perform well, then they can't be passed up as a candidate for the Big Ten title game.
But if they slip up, they could fall quickly, and starting quarterback Alex Hornibrook was very inconsistent last year, only throwing just short of 1,300 yards.
That's pretty terrible, but the pressure is on, especially after the 4 starting freshman Jack Cohn became the talk of the spring. If Hornibrook can't live up to offensive expectations, he might find himself on the bench, giving Cohn a chance to take charge.
The backfield is well covered with a few returners, most notably the sophomore from Alabama, Bradrick Shaw, who had 88 carries for 457 yards last season.
The rushing game has always been the Wisconsin way. Since aerial attacks are often inconsistent, and unless Cohn is called up to the helm, you can expect a lot of running plays.
The defensive unit is much more consistent, though. They finished 7th overall last season and limited teams to just over 300 yards. They will be missing 2 key starters, TJ Watt and Vince Beigel, who combined for 107 tackles and 15 sacks.
But there is plenty of other talent to pull from, not to mention the defense was extremely good at preventing the big offensive plays, limiting opposing quarterbacks to less than a 50% completion rate.
There were 2 games the pass defense struggled in, and that was against Georgia State and Penn State, neither of which they have to play this year.
There is one thing that could hinder this defense, as his name is Jim Leonhard, the new defensive coordinator who is only entering his 2nd season on the coaching staff after serving as defensive back coach last year.
Even with an inexperienced coordinator, Wisconsin can very easily walk their way to a Big Ten title and earn themselves a trip to the playoff game.
The Big Blue finished 3rd in the Big Ten East last season with a 10-3 record, enough to earn them a preseason ranking of 11, but this team is a young one.
Luckily, they returned veteran quarterback Wilton Speight, who threw for 2,538 yards. But what I loved about the Michigan offense last year was the balance. They averaged 213 rushing yards and 212 passing yards, while also averaging 40 points per game.
You can't get any more balanced than that, and it makes you that much more of a threat. But before you get too excited, they are a young team because they lost several key playmakers. And with half of the receiving corps gone, the offense may not retain that balance.
Yes, they lost a talented group of receivers, but they've snagged 4-star recruit Tariq Black, who was the standout this offseason. He's young like most of the team, but Michigan does a good job of instilling the basics in their players, which teams often forget to do. With an experienced quarterback in the driver's seat, I think the raw talent on this team will develop quickly. Penn State, Ohio State, and Wisconsin will be their bigger games, giving them plenty of time to clean up any rookie mistakes they might make early on.
Well, I don't see that balance lasting this year. One type of offense is going to dominate the other, and it's going to become contingent on their offensive identity, the running backs or the receivers.
The defense is plagued with a similar problem, losing nearly all of its starters. The Wolverines were the best defense in the nation last year, holding the opponent to 261 yards a game and narrowly beating Alabama. But when all of your defensive tackles have moved on, how quickly can you recreate the defense?
Until they hit week 4, the defense will probably be okay. The run defense should remain strong, and the secondary won't be tested too hard since none of their first-string opponents can throw the ball well.
And because of that, the Wolverines will shine in the beginning of the season, but once they reach those 3 teams I mentioned before, I think they're going to encounter some problems.
I think that they are a very young team, and I do not think that they're going to fare very well, but they will get into a decent bowl game. Well, that concludes our show for the AP Top 20.
Don't forget to tune in next week. We'll be covering your Week 1 college football preview featuring the best games of the week. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at BJ_RedZone, where we'll have all the updates and game coverage. Have a good night.